Now, my next guest was born and bred only around the corner from me in Widnes, which is people will say it's a small town. It's a lovely town in Cheshire. But he went to Arizona, intent on becoming a stockbroker, which he did, and made a lot of money doing it. But while there, he also began to experiment with ecstasy, began using it, and eventually began selling it, basically. And that eventually became his primary source of income. And an extraordinary thing about his story is his main competitor, the guy that was up against him in the ecstasy market, was a guy called Salvatore Sammy Zabul Gravano. Now, everybody who's ever read about the mafia will have heard of him because he was one of the captains of the Gambino crime family. It's an amazing story, this. My only guest ended up in prison. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, he ended up in one of the most famous prisons in the world, Maricopa County Jail, run by Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who I've interviewed several times over the years. That's all behind him now. It's been the subject of several books. I'll tweet you on how to find those books and where to find out more info about him. But let's just welcome him on and get him on before we do anything else. Let's welcome to the programme Shaun Attwood. Shaun, how are you? You're welcome.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Richie. I just listened to your interviews with Rick Simpson and John Lonergan today, and I was thinking, what great guys. If only people like that were running the country instead of these warmongering sellouts.
Can you imagine if guys like John Lonergan were running prisons? And as you said, people like Rick Simpson. Yeah, when you interview people like this for a living, Shaun, it does cross your mind. It's like the old Howard Zinn thing. The wrong people are running the government. The wrong people are not running the government. The wrong people are in jail. The wrong people are out of jail. It's absolutely spot on. Your story, mate, is there aren't many stories like yours. It's an amazing story. Can I ask you about Sheriff Joe Arpaio? Because I interviewed him a couple of times on radio in Spain, and they were very hostile interviews. But to his credit, every subsequent time he was asked to come on, he kept coming back for more abuse. And I thought to myself, I don't know what the guy is like, but, he takes a kicking like nobody's business. But then somebody said to me, he gave plenty of kickings in his time as well. The last time I spoke to him, he was in serious trouble because of all sorts of fraud allegations against him. What was your experience of that particular prison, dubbed America's toughest prison? What was it like there?
His jail has the highest rate of death out of all the jails and prisons in America. 62 people died around the time I was there over 5 years. And they weren't big bad gang members. Some of them were mentally ill prisoners murdered by the guards. One was a blind prisoner murdered by the guards, Brian Crenshaw. They did it on camera. Family members sued the jail and were awarded compensation. And the guards that were found responsible in federal court for murdering those prisoners, Sheriff Joe Arpaio later rewarded some of them with pay rises and promotions.
He's the definitive bad guy, isn't he? When you look at the many things that he was said to have done, the things that he was proven to have done, and the many other things he was alleged to have done that were never proved. 17 officers died there. And that's just basic stuff on the Wikipedia page, but I know a lot about the prison because I did a lot of radio shows on it in the past as well. Many of them suspicious deaths over the years, guys who worked there, presumably guys, Shaun, who were going to blow the whistle on what was going on.
Absolutely. Arpaio is one of the biggest gangsters out there. And if you look at, his track record with these murders in the jail, Scott Norberg, for example, he was a mentally ill man found wandering a neighborhood. They brought him in. The guards started pulverizing him, beating him with taser guns, electrocuting him. A female guard tried to stop it. Stop beating him, his face is turning blue. They pushed her off, they kept beating him. The inmates watching in the holding cell started yelling, "Why are you still beating him? He's already dead." And even after that, the guards continued to beat the corpse after it turned blue and everything.
And what happened to those guards?
Nothing happens to the people on the other side. They have immunity. The jail ends up paying out compensation to the family members of the victims. They've paid over 50 million right now, and they've got over 50 million pending. It's been a massive disaster for the taxpayers. Sheriff Joe is boasting, I give these people moldy food. It costs less than 50 cents a day to feed each prisoner. Yet all these lawsuits are being paid out constantly.
The lunatics in the right-wing news on Fox and elsewhere, they love this guy, don't they? They used to have him on all the time. I remember seeing him on O'Reilly, on Hannity. He was held up as the answer to crime. This is how you deal with criminals. So amazing. You mentioned John Lonergan, one of the most decent, kind, warm men that ever walked a beat in a prison. I remember interviewing John on the radio years ago in Ireland. And you won't be surprised, Shaun, prisoners coming forward to say, listen, don't mention my name, but I was in Mountjoy prison for a bit because I got into a bit of trouble. This guy was great, the way he looked after people, the way he treated you like you were a human being, no matter what you did, humanity. And on the other side of it, across the pond, you have this lunatic who is still running that prison today.
I was blown away by the contrast between John Lonergan and Sheriff Joe Arpaio. It's a pity there's not more people like John Lonergan, because I understand where people are coming from when they say lock prisoners up and throw away the key, because the media, all they do is put out stories of extreme crime, and they say how easy it is, playstations, gourmet food. And I didn't understand that until I got in there myself. And when I saw that it was the warehousing of non-violent drug offenders, the biggest house of the mentally ill, people of colour 4 times more likely to get arrested for the same crime, and all these corporations making money off the backs of them, ranging from the private prisons, which were getting $50,000 a year of taxpayers' money per prisoner, to people like the phone contractors. Collect call back to a loved one in the local area costs $5 to $10. Collect call for me to call back to the UK costs my parents over £50 for 5 minutes.
Jesus. And you mentioned the privatisation. Many of these, and you know this because this is something you've read about, written about, spoken about so much. Many of these corporations, like the Correction Corporation of America, basically said to states like Arizona, we'll take over your prison so long as you guarantee us 98% occupancy.
Yes, and Corrections Corporation of America are boasting in the annual report to their shareholders, our profit growth is guaranteed because our reoffending is so high. They're not correcting people, they're breaking them. They allow it to be drug and gang infested. They don't give these guys any job skills, education, ways of dealing with the addiction issues, because they know they'll just come out, go right back to crime, and come right back to the prison. $50,000 a year.
Has any journalist with any clout? I mean, I've been spending a lot of time over the last couple of days reading about you, Shaun, and I've looked online at several speeches you've given in your time, and I've been incredibly impressed by how well briefed you are on this particular issue. I mean that sincerely. You're incredibly well briefed.
Thank you.
You really are, mate. And what about journalists with any sort of clout writing for any sort of well-known newspaper? Is anybody writing about one of the greatest scandals in modern history? Is that this is going on, that they are allowing prisoners to live like this, to be drugged up, to have all this violence, because the end game is so that they'll walk out the door on Monday and they'll walk back in on Tuesday night. Is anybody screaming about this?
That doesn't sell newspaper copies. What sells newspaper copies is putting out stories of extreme crime and how easy it is for the prisoners. So it's only in the alternative media that you're seeing these stories come about.
It's only in the independent media, isn't it? It's extraordinary.
The Phoenix New Times really have attacked Arpaio over the years. They've done a great job. That
particular newspaper has it. In
yes.
Arizona has gone after him, and yet he remains. He's like a bad guy. I mean, he's like a traditional, serial drama. Whether it's that we could use Dallas as an example, he's J.R. Ewing, but he's 200 times more corrupt and evil. And no matter what he does, he's still there.
Because he personifies tough on crime. And the public, there's something deep-rooted in the human psyche that feels lock them up and throw away the key. Until parents get a call from their teenage kid in his jail saying, I'm stuck in a cell with a rapist, he's got a padlock in a sock, he's threatening to kill me, I need $50,000 to get out. People don't care. It's only at that point that they wake up. But so many young people have been arrested now under the war of drugs. You've got this backlash against it. People are sick of it, and that's why you're seeing the decriminalization across America. How did a guy like you, a pacifist, I mean, some of our listeners might have issues with you selling ecstasy, and that's fair enough. People are entitled to their opinion.
I don't know what I think of it, to be honest. I really don't. I've never been judgmental, me. I'm lucky enough that I never really took anything. Because I was just lucky enough that I was never in that situation. Who knows? There, but for the grace of God. But you're a totally non-violent guy. You come across as a lovely bloke in your interviews, in the speeches that you give. How the hell did a guy like you cope when you went into that particular prison? Talk about a shock to the system. Can you even remember it? What was it like on day one when you were thrown in that bloody hellhole?
Right away, I had to get used to the sounds of heads getting bashed against toilets and bodies getting thrown around in cells, people getting carried out on stretchers who look like they were dead. It's all completely gang controlled. It's all racial gangs. So right away, Aryan Brotherhood prison gang come up to me. First thing they say is, "What's your charges?" And you can't lie because it's on a little printout from the jail. Some charges are KOS, kill on sight by the gang, such as paedophile stuff. Other charges are SOS, smash on sight by the gang, such as drive-by shootings, because women and kids sometimes get hit. So anyone coming in with a sex offence or a crime against a woman or a child, gang is going to try and murder them right away. Under every head of the gang, a guy's called torpedoes. They're roaming around the jail looking for people to smash, because that's how they earn their reputations and their tattoos. To rise up through the ranks, you've got to beat people up. Be a full member of these gangs, you have to murder someone. That's how you get your full tattoo. Now, I was lucky in the sense that over 100 people were arrested with me from the rave scene, including some of my bouncers, including my best mate from Widnes, Wild Man. He's 25 stone. His nose is pointing to the side. So these guys were protecting me when I first went in, so it was more a case of me seeing the violence than feeling it.
Thank God for that. And these guys act with immunity because the guards couldn't give a damn. That's basically what... I mean, I watched a documentary some time ago. Louis Theroux was in, I think, a lockup in Los Angeles, and it looked terrible. And guys were being brought in, Shaun, pending trial. They didn't get bail, for example, so they were chucked into a cell with a load of other guys, and they didn't know how long they were going to be there. And the minute they got in there, they were told to have a fight with one of the other guys in there to kind of, establish the kind of pecking order in the cell. I remember thinking, I'm a big guy, I'm 6.5 foot tall, I weigh about 15.5 stone. And, I played sports over the years. If it came to it, I could probably look after myself, but I was terrified looking at this. I was terrified. I thought, holy Jesus, can you imagine getting pulled in and you're no bail for you. You don't have the money to make bail, some traffic violation. Next thing you remember all these guys and they're saying, we're going to kick the shit out of you. And this is realistic.
Yeah, it was absolutely realistic. One of the gang rules is that if someone hits you, calls you a punk or a bitch, you must fight them on the spot or else the whole gang will smash you. I got into it with a couple of guys after I got split from my co-defendants. I ended up in a cell with a serial home invader, torturer. He was breaking into people's houses and taking ball-peen hammers to their kneecaps.
Hang on a second, say that again. You ended up in a cell with a guy who was in for what?
Serial home invader, torturer.
Oh, holy Jesus.
Breaking into houses and taking ball-peen hammers to people's kneecaps. That was his favourite method of torture. And his welcoming statement to me the night I moved in was, I've got a padlock in a sock. I can smash your brains in while you sleep. I can kill you whenever I want.
Oh, my God.
He knew my family were flying 5,000 miles from Widnes to come and visit me. So he got his mate, a 20-stone California biker, to attack me just when I was going to the visit with my parents. I was just walking along as happy as can be in this crowded corridor. Big guy sneaks up behind me like, bam, bam, starts kidney punching me. All the prisoners stopped to see my reaction. So, I had to hit back. I started throwing punches and stuff, but it was like hitting a big bag of cement. And this guy was trained in kickboxing. He spun me around, smashed me up, knocked me down. I ended up going to the visit all injured. And my mum was asking me what's wrong, and I couldn't say because she'd already had a nervous breakdown over my situation.
How do you cope with that? How does a guy who hasn't grown up with that, who doesn't understand violence, how do you not go insane having to face that?
Well, the way I looked at it was, America was good to me. I broke the law, I pushed it to the limit, and I brought it all on myself. And I was emotionally immature to make those decisions. So I needed to go through all this to grow up as a person, and it actually strengthened me mentally.
You didn't deserve that though, Shaun. I can understand. It's very, very commendable that you would say, I broke the law, I shouldn't have been selling drugs, and I deserved, I deserve something. I mean, I would have said, you get a big fine and you get to wear a bracelet for a bit. And I tell you, if I see you back here again, you're going inside for 6 months. That's what you do with people who are not committing violence. Yeah. You don't put non-violent people in prison. I've always believed that. If somebody is not capable of or hasn't committed an act of violence, don't put them in prison. All right, it's different if it's mass fraud and they're stealing from people and stuff like that. Well, some sort of restitution. But not people involved in the drug scene. You weren't brought up with that. You didn't know what violence was. There's no way, I'm not having it that you deserved it. I think it's commendable you say that. How long were you in there? Remind our listeners.
I was in for exactly 5 3/4 years as a first-time non-violent drug offender.
Jesus Christ. Nearly 6 years in that prison.
Yes.
How do you get used to it then?
26 months in Sheriff Joe Arpaio's jail. I was only on remand in Sheriff Joe Arpaio's jail. Those guys are on sentence. There's actually a presumption of innocence. So the balance of it, I served in the Arizona Department of Corrections.
So it was over 2 years in Maricopa with Sheriff Joe and the posse, shall we say?
Yes.
That must have felt like 20 years, did it?
It's called hard time, and they say every day in Sheriff Joe Arpaio's jail is like doing 3 or more days in the prison system.
This lunatic must have to have round the clock armed guards. He must do.
You see him on YouTube. He's got all these adoring prisoners looking up at him affectionately, thanking him for turning their lives around. But my experience was, in the jail, I was in my cell one day. I heard all of these expletives raining down from the cells. We were locked down. I went to my plexiglass window, looked down, and there was the sheriff, tiny little guy, surrounded by what's called a goon squad. These are armed guards in shank-proof body armor. And everyone was just, banging the tables, banging the walls, and just, yelling death threats at this guy.
Amazing. Folks, if you're just tuning into the programme, Shaun Attwood is on the line. Shaun went to Arizona some years ago. He's originally from Widnes, and he went to work as a stockbroker there, began to take ecstasy, got involved in distributing it, eventually got caught and was given a 5 3/4 year sentence, an extremely harsh sentence for a first offence for a non-violent criminal. And over 2 years of that was spent in the notorious Maricopa County Jail run by Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who I've had on programmes a couple of times. In fact, I can dig out one of those interviews and play it some night. It's really nasty because I'm giving him all the, the John Lonergan type stuff and he's not liking it one bit. But he stayed on, to be fair to him. He did stay on and took the abuse. Andrea asked this, and others have asked this. It might sound like a kind of a churlish question, but I think it's a fair question because television dominates so much of our lives now. How close to TV shows like Prison Break is actual prison like? Is there any sort of... Do the TV programmes get anywhere close to what it's really like?
Characters like Teabag in Prison Break absolutely exist. That's what they based him on. So these programmes, you meet people like that in there. Obviously, there's a lot of inconsistencies in Prison Break. Like you wouldn't, for example, see a guy on death row housed in the same prison as someone who'd just done a robbery, like the two brothers were.
Yeah.
But, yeah, the characters are real.
The characters are real. Tell us about, and we'll in a couple of minutes now, we'll give a proper good plug to your books because they're well worth plugging. And we'll do all that now in a second, and I'll tweet it out as well. Sexual violence in these prisons. How severe is it? What goes on? Why does it happen? And, what are the long-term effects of it?
Well, I do talks in schools now to put young people off getting involved in drugs and crime. And one of the most common questions I get asked is, did I drop the soap in the shower?
From children?
Yeah, from school kids, years 10, 11, up to sixth form is what I speak to mostly. And, we've all seen The Shawshank Redemption, where the sisters come up to him in the shower. He's like, can I be a friend to you? And he gets brutalized later on. And I was thinking that was going to happen to me. Skinny, nerdy business graduate end up in this shower with this load of big tattooed men. Fortunately, that never happened to me, but it is prevalent in the American prison system. It's so common, actually, we have what's called a rape class. The rape class involves going in, you're watching a video about how not to get raped. And they show predators in a day room, and they're offering candy to the young prisoners coming in. And it says, if you take the candy, you'll be in debt, and then you'll have to return it with sexual favors. And at the conclusion of the video, they said, to stop this, the prisoners must report the rapists. But as the gangs explain to you when you come in, if you make friends with the guards or tell the guards anything, give them the slightest clue that you're snitching, it's K on sight. It's KOS, kill on sight, for that. So after we all went to this rape class, this was in Tucson prison, a young mentally ill prisoner was gang raped and nobody reported anything because you can't report anything.
I can't even begin to imagine what it's all about. It's not necessarily, I've read, it's not necessarily about sex. It's not because a group of guys full to the brim of testosterone who don't get to have sex have to have sex. It's not just quite that. Power has a lot to do with it. Is that right?
Yes, I met a prisoner who was gang raped multiple times, and he said it was about power. I don't know how graphic I'm allowed to be on your show, but I could tell you his story if you like.
We're past the watershed. It's 29 minutes past the hour. Shaun is going to mention a story. If you're queasy, and if you don't like that sort of thing, turn your radio down for about 2.5 minutes. I mean that. If you're a bit queasy and if you're upset, I won't say upset easily because, Jesus, you should be upset by this stuff. But turn your radio down for a couple of minutes. Not because we're in any way voyeuristic or because we're, we're crazy to hear about the gore, but tell us the story because it is important.
Well, this was actually in the Arizona Department of Corrections. And the friend I made was a person called Zena. It was a 6.5-foot charismatic transsexual at that time. Zena was when I met him. And he got gang raped 20 years before I met him. He was big back then, a young person, weightlifting, clicked up with the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang as a debt collector, and it's blood in, blood out. Young people think it's cool to get in with these gangs, but when they've used them up, they do brutal things. And in Zena's case, what I said to Zena, what happened, Zena said it was first time was a gang rape. They beat me up, shoved things inside my body, beat me until I was unconscious, raped me while I was unconscious. I said, what did they shove inside your body? A broomstick.
Jesus.
So, well, how do you know if you were unconscious that they were actually raping you? He said, when I went to the toilet afterwards, I could tell by what came out. I said, well, what did you do after being raped? I sat in my cell waiting for the scars to go. I got moved to another yard, but the same thing happened. They beat me up, used me as a sex toy, a prostitute, a punk. There's no recourse. You can't tell the guards or else then you're a snitch, or the guards will lock you in a dungeon for months or years and say it's for your own protection. You can do absolutely nothing other than kill the perpetrators. So I said, well, did you think about killing the people who did this to you? I thought about killing myself first. I wanted to. I still do sometimes. Zena started crying at this point. He couldn't answer any more questions. But he came back the next day because we were writing a blog to raise awareness of prison rape. And I said, how did you stop it? I took the abuse for as long as I could, and I started fighting. I won most of the fights. When I stood up and told them I didn't care if I got killed, it stopped. You've got to be ruthless. You've got to be ruthless. Well, that's understatement.
Yeah.
Zena hadn't told me the truth as to how he'd stopped this gang raping business because he didn't want to risk any trouble for what he'd done. Zena was studying anatomy, and he came up with an idea. The next 2 times the gang came to rape Zena, the first member of the gang to put his hand on Zena plucked his eyeball out so it was dangling from the optic nerve. He did that twice and they left him alone, but they moved on to 2 of his friends. One of his friends they gang raped, took a light bulb out, shoved it in his backside, smashed it while it was in there. That prisoner later committed suicide. And then the next one was gang raped, stabbed 100 times, over 100 times. They got a shovel from the work crew, cut his head off, and they positioned the head in an area of the prison where the rival gangs would see it to make the point they were the most violent and ruthless of the gangs.
Now this goes on in a prison. And in some of these prisons are funded by taxpayers. Many of them now, of course, are run by massive institutions like the Corrections Corporation of America, I would say, one of the most corrupt institutions on planet Earth. Imagine that is going on. You heard John, I don't know how much about John Lonergan you knew before you heard our interview with him, But John has been screaming from the rooftops for years, Shaun, that the most serious thing a society can do is deprive one of its citizens of their freedom. It's a huge responsibility. And he says to hand that person, that man or woman, over to a corporation is, well, it's so heinous. He said to me, and I've been interviewing John for years, it's so heinous to be beyond words to do that to a person, to give them to a corporation. And it's going on now in the United States. It's damn well coming in here, as we know, in the United Kingdom. And it's going to come in Ireland as well.
Well, you've got these companies paying the politicians on both sides massive political contributions to keep it in place and to tighten the laws. You've even got prison guards unions, the companies supplying the phone contracts. For example, 3 strikes law. You can get life for 3 non-violent crimes. So you've got guys right now, in California especially, stealing a pizza, stealing cookies. They're serving 25 to life, $50,000 a year. All that, add that up over 25 years. It's multi-millions going from the taxpayers over to all these contractors, the guards unions, the phone contractors.
You can't even say it without laughing, Shaun. You can't even say it without laughing, and I totally understand it. We've spoken about that on this programme, the 3 strikes and you're out. You get life in prison for 3 innocuous crimes that don't really do a lot of harm to anybody, and you're banged up for the rest of your life.
And in California, the taxpayers tried to get it repealed, and it was founder of Broadcom and the Prison Guards Union put up the money to stop it from getting repealed. And it was the Prison Guards Union that put up the money to get 3 strikes in the first place.
Shaun, by the way, you can find Shaun on ShaunAttwood.com, ShaunAttwood.com. There are links on there as to how to find his excellent books. As I said, he's written several books now about his time in that prison, and more besides. As I said, as I'm speaking, I'm going to tweet out all these links now to where you can find these books. But while we have Shaun on, I did mention on Facebook and social media today that because Shaun is a former stock market expert, a stockbroker, and because he's got opinions on insider trading in the days and weeks and months even leading up to September the 11th, I wanted to ask him about that because it's obviously something we're very interested in this programme. When it's talked about in the independent media, Shaun, September 11th, we do focus a lot on how it happened, on who gave the orders, on Bin Laden wasn't alive, he died, and all the sort of stuff we get into, and whether the terrorists came down with explosives or exotic weapons, all of that. One of the things we don't get into often enough is hard evidence that there was advanced knowledge that there was going to be a big event on that day. How did you first get into that?
Well, my background is at 14 years old in my high school, I chose economics, and the teacher really took me under his wing. He's got me reading the Financial Times, following the stock market. At 16, borrowed 50 quid off my nan, doubled it in BT shares. So I was hooked on the stock market from that young age. I went down the library, ordered dozens of books on the subject. And my goal was to go to America and make $1 million in the stock market. So in 1991, I became a stockbroker, got my Series 7 license. Before I became a day trader, I was a stockbroker for about 6 years in America. And as I rose up the ranks, I became the options principal for our branch. I had a Series 4 license. I'd traded options as a teenager, and it was in the options market that the 9/11 insider trading was placed. It's such a small market, it's esoteric, hard to understand. You need a finance degree to unravel these trades, really.
Give it to us in English then, my friend. Give it to us in English. What happened?
Okay, imagine if you owned a betting shop, and every week about £5,000 was bet on a variety of horses. And that it'd been like that for years. And then one week, all of a sudden, £500,000 are bet on just 1 or 2 horses. And let's call those horses American and United Airlines. Prior to 9/11, on the Thursday, 2,000 contracts were placed betting United Airlines would go down. That was 90 times the volume of the preceding 3 weeks. Now, it was all over the news. In the beginning, it was in the financial newspapers because people watch spikes in volume because it indicates something could be going on, and people tend to trade. They tend to piggyback on insider trading because it's very profitable. So it first came up in the financial newspapers. 9/11 happens. Next thing, it's all over the news. People were saying, this could very well be insider trading at the most horrific, most evil use you've ever seen in your entire life. That was on CBS. It is absolutely unprecedented to see cases of insider trading covering the entire world, from Japan to the United States, North America and Europe, and on and on and on. It went for about 4 months, and then it completely disappeared off the face of the earth. I thought I'd imagined it, because immediately in my naivety back then, I knew that if these trades had been placed, there's a paper trail back to whoever placed them. Because I was actually investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission for insider trading put options on a company I'd bet that the shares were going to go down. So I knew the entire procedure. You get letters from the SEC asking who your clients are, what their relationships with the company are, and all that kind of stuff. So I was thinking, okay, they've got the terrorists. Surely this is going to get traced back to the terrorists, and they'll be able to nail them, and they're going to get arrested, and justice will prevail. Boy, was I wrong. So it disappears off the news. Years later, this is when I'm on this adventure of reading all these books in prison. And I come across a book, and it picked up on it. And what the book had said was, yes, the federal government had launched an investigation into the insider trading, and the investigation had found a preponderance of trades went through Alex Brown, but the investigation had found that it was all completely normal trading. So when I got out, I researched it more, and Alex Brown, where all these trades went through, the executive director of the CIA at the time of 9/11 had just left Alex Brown. He was the chairman of Alex Brown. So the federal investigation had led right back to the CIA, another branch of the federal government.
Did you hear that, folks? Did you hear what Shaun Attwood just told you there? That the insider trading, 90 times the normal put option being a bet that a stock is going to fall, were made 90 times the average on United Airlines and American Airlines. And when the trail led back to the CIA, the investigation was immediately halted. And even when they initially said that, it was normal, it was just a little bit more, but it was normal, you knew, because of your experience, didn't you, Shaun, that it was bullshit? You knew there was no way that could be normal. Somebody had to have known.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if one company had insider trading, there's a chance of that happening, but to have two airlines would be getting struck by lightning twice on the same day. And it happened on even more companies than that. Defense contractors like Raytheon, bets were placed that they were going to go up. This happened all over the world. But the story gets much worse, because what happened then was the investigators of the federal government, all the people they questioned that were closest to knowing what was going on, hundreds of people, they deputized them, which meant if they said anything to anyone about what they knew, they could throw them in jail.
That's right.
And then when all of the investigation was finished, the report was completely destroyed.
And because we have an unquestioning, complicit, let's be honest, whoring mainstream media, no questions are asked about it. None. I think Rolling Stone did an article, to their credit, didn't they, at some stage, in 04 or 05, terrific article, which basically said that pretty much said what you said, Shaun, that once it started leading towards people up a certain ladder, the investigation came to a grinding halt.
Yes, and Max Kaiser of RT, he actually worked at Alex Brown at one point, and he spoke out about it as well.
Now, I've interviewed him a few times, Kaiser, but I've never gotten into that with him, strangely enough. I know he's spoken about it before, and he's gone as far as saying that, has he?
Yes, you need to get him back on.
Well, we fell out a couple of years ago because he was pushing Bitcoin really hard.
Right.
at a time when he had a company that was making money out of trading in Bitcoin. And
Right.
on a radio interview in Spain, I said, "You're a bit cheeky there, aren't you?" And he didn't like it very much.
Oh dear.
No. A lot of narcissists in the independent media. There's as many of them in the independent media as there are in the mainstream media. I'm not saying he's a bad guy at all, but he didn't like the questioning, and he said he wouldn't come on with me again. And I said, well, fuck you, I couldn't care less, to be honest.
Okay.
It's as simple as that, you know. You can't answer a simple question. You can't be promoting a product that you're selling. You can't be telling people Bitcoin is the answer to the Orwellian nightmare that we're in while you're making a tidy sum of money out of it. You can't do that.
Conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest is called, you know. He could have answered it and he could have put me straight. Maybe there was a good answer to it, but he didn't. But I'm not saying he's a bad guy, and I know he does some interesting things on RT, and I recommend that people check him out if they haven't done already. It's 15 minutes to the top of the hour. We've got Shaun for a few more minutes. Shaun, a couple of nice emails have come in about Hard Time. Quite a few of our listeners have read Hard Time and have said they found it absolutely fascinating. Of course, it's fascinating. Why hasn't Hollywood optioned the book, or have they? They have done, have they? Who's optioned the book? Tell us.
No, nobody's optioned the book.
Piss off. Somebody's optioned a book.
If anyone's listening, just email me.
Nobody's optioned a book. I cannot believe that. It's one of the greatest, most interesting, horrifying, but at the same time fascinating stories that you could come across. And you're telling me that the likes of, surely to God, some of our big directors here in England want to do that story. Come on.
Well, I'm just a little guy rebuilding my life, so maybe down the road, if the story grows, it'll get to that level.
You're a gas man, Shaun, as we were saying earlier. I mean, messing with the Gambino crime family. Did you even know that these people, we see The Sopranos, we see what happens to people when they, when they interfere with the bottom line of a hard-nosed gangster. How did you get away with that? You went to prison, I suppose. That's how you got away with it.
When you're on drugs and you've seen Scarface, Pulp Fiction, Blow, the drugs are telling you this is the coolest thing in the world at the time. You're the man, you're Mr. Cool Guy, you can do anything. So as this happened, as I went further and further over this slippery slope, it all just seemed normal to me. With the Gravano, what happened was I got in way before him into the rave scene, and I was tight with a lot of the locals. The New Mexican Mafia had my back as well. These people started to pop up at the raves and the clubs, and they were a different breed of ecstasy dealers, and I was noticing them, and we were like, who are these guys stepping on my toes? So I got called to a meeting at a bar, and these two guys, I took one of my bouncers with me, had a gun, he's watching my back, and these two guys were in there. One was, his biceps were as big as my head. They cleared this sofa off, and they tried to pitch me on their pills. And I said, look, I'm getting stuff out of Holland. I've got a good reputation for it. I'd rather stay with my own product. And I started to say that their pills were coloured pills and they weren't pure. And then one of the big guy got upset and he started yelling, we work for Sammy the Bull. Did that mean anything to you at the time? Yeah,
Sammy the Bull, it did.
John Gotti was just all over the news back then, and Sammy the Bull, the underboss of the Gambinos, had murdered up to 24 people. So yeah, I knew who it was. We got out of there pretty fast, and I ended up with one of my salespeople. He got they knocked his front teeth out, and I left Phoenix. After that, I moved into a house on a mountain in a gated, guarded community in the hope that these guys wouldn't get me. But Sammy the Bull's son later on told me in prison he'd been dispatched as the head of an armed crew to kidnap me one night from a nightclub and to take me out to the desert. And the only reason they missed us that night is because my mate Wildman had got in a scuffle and we'd had to leave that club in a hurry. So on the drugs, it was telling me I was doing all this exciting stuff. But when I look back, in the jail, when that cloud had lifted out of my head that the drugs had put in there, first thing I thought was, how on earth was I still alive? You
came close a few times, there's no doubt about that. It's 12 minutes to the top of the hour. Massive interest in your comments about insider trading on and before 9/11. Why did they take the risk, Shaun? They're going to pull off one of the greatest false flag coups in the history of the world. We know they did it. We know that 19 hijackers from the Middle East didn't take over those planes with standing knives. We know they didn't do that. That didn't happen. It's lies. We know who really did it. Why then did they take such a massive risk to leave that trail of insider trading Or is it so secure and so smarmy and smug in their safety and security that they could just do whatever they wanted? What do you think when you think of that? Why did they take the risk?
Well, it's why did Hitler and Napoleon invade Russia? It's the arrogance of people in power. They just think they're above the law and they can get away with anything. And they did. They got away with it. They made all the money off it. The profit from that insider trading was up in the hundreds of millions. So they mission accomplished as far as they're concerned.
Tell me this now, my friend. Was some of that money unclaimed? Did I read that somewhere?
Yes, there was a transaction. I think it was several $1 million that was left unclaimed. And I imagine that person, saw what had happened and they got scared and didn't want to risk. Perhaps if they'd have claimed it, they would have got caught for knowing what was going on.
It's definitive proof, isn't it, that the whole event was a complete false flag from top to bottom. It was one of the things that convinced me early on, because I knew about this when I was reading David's book, Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster. That's when I first learned about it. And I felt so embarrassed having broadcast on the day for WLRFM in Ireland and worked with presenters there all through the afternoon, taking over the afternoon schedule to report on this, running around grabbing names of people we knew in New York to tell us what was happening, and then repeating, as we were being told by AFP and Reuters, that the scary man in the cave did it, rather than, say, oh, that can't be right. We just repeated it, and I felt horribly embarrassed. But that was one of the things that did it for me, was learning that a lot of money was made. Some of our listeners are saying 2 questions. There's too many people to name on Twitter. 2 questions coming out loud and clear. One was, didn't they try to pin it on bin Laden at some stage? That bin Laden must have been doing the insider trading. Did somebody say that at some stage and then did it go away? And second question was, is there a decent documentary online that you can recommend that details the insider trading?
Okay, all of the news commentary for the first 4 months were pinning it on bin Laden. And I myself was thinking it had to be someone associated with whoever had done it, i.e. terrorists, because that's how naive I was. But after that 4-month period, completely disappeared off the news. And what was the second question, sorry?
And the second question was, sorry, my friend, I had my microphone off there. My second question was, my listeners asking, is there a decent documentary that you know of online that specifically talks about the insider trading?
No, nobody has stepped up to the plate on this at all. And I'm actually going to do a series of books called We Are Being Lied To. I'm going to detail it more in one of those books.
Do you worry about that? I mean, people say it's 11, 12 years now. It's 14 years since it happened now. It'll be 15 years next year. And people say, well, they've probably stopped murdering people that know anything. Probably. I wouldn't be so sure of it. And somebody with your experience and your knowledge, for you to start dipping into that, that's where you'd have to be careful, mate. It sounds like you have 9 lives, Shaun.
Richie,
you might have used 6 of them already,
I've written about the Italian mafia. I've written about the New Mexican mafia. I've written about biker gangs. I've written about the prison gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood. And never has the hair on my neck risen so much as writing about the CIA in the research I'm doing right now for my book on the war on drugs.
Because of what you're finding out.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, these hiring Nazis like Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Leon, to form death squads in South America, and he's big-time coke distributing, all sponsored by the CIA. It just blows your mind what's going on up there.
I tell you what, my friend, that's been one of the quickest 45 minutes that I've ever had on this programme. I want to thank you for coming on, but I want to direct people to ShaunAttwood.com. Now, Shaun is spelled S-H-A-U-N. He's a Philistine, is Shaun. He's not one of us. S-H-A-U-N. And it's Attwood, A-T-T, wood.com, ShaunAttwood.com. On there are links to Hard Time, Prison Time, Hard Time 2nd edition, and, of course, Party Time. Shaun's books, they're all available at all good online retailers. Go to ShaunAttwood.com. His story is, to me, vastly more interesting than The Wolf of Wall Street or anything else like that. How this hasn't been optioned and made into a major motion picture, as they used to say back in the day, I have no idea, mate. I would love to see this put on the big screen, because so many more people would see it. But maybe, just maybe, your comments and your talking about insider trading and stuff like that, maybe that's the reason why it hasn't been. Because if they do option the film and it just talks about your time in prison and with the gangsters, which is incredibly interesting, of course what will happen is then the major talk shows will have to get you back on again. And if you do go on again and you start bringing that sort of thing up, who knows where all that will lead. So it's incredibly interesting. Mate, it was an absolute pleasure. I'll give you the last word, Shaun, but it's been a pleasure having you on the programme, my friend. Go ahead, last word to you.
Oh, I just really appreciate being on, Richie. And, I saw the horror that drug use can lead to in the jail, because 90% of those guys were shooting up heroin and crystal meth. 2/3 had hepatitis C, which is slowly killing them. And I got on that road as a student, thought it was fun, it was cool. And I couldn't change my past, but I resolved to go out, share my story with young people in the hope they won't get involved in drugs and crime and make my mistakes.
Pleasure to have you on, my friend. Have a great weekend. Don't be a stranger. Keep in touch with us, Shaun. You're always welcome back on the programme, and I'll ask you back on again early in the new year. Thanks again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. ShaunAttwood.com. That's the email address. ShaunAttwood.com. That's where you'll find Shaun.